We talked briefly about our web app in the last section, but this time we're going to dive a little bit further into these. Now that we have our app service plan and a sample web application up running, let's take a look at some of the settings we can configure on it. So we have some language-specific settings that we can configure. These are unique per language, but have some common examples, such as setting the version of the language, startup processes, as well as running custom commands. Another option is connection strings. If we have data on another platform and we need to configure our application so that it knows how to connect to that and how to authenticate. For added security, if there are any secrets that are part of that connection string, we can leverage Azure Key Vault so those secrets are referenced in the connection string but kept securely in the Key Vault. SSL settings are a common item, and this allows you to configure the minimum TLS version as well as if HTTPS is required when using the web app. Depending on the plan, you can also use a custom certificate to secure your site. And by default, your web apps will have a public name under the azurewebsites.net domain. You also have that option to create a custom domain name as part of your website. App Service Plan metrics are extremely useful to help keep an eye on your applications. Much in the same as we discussed about ACI, we won't have access to that underlying OS, so we need to rely on the metrics to help identify issues. In addition to helping us troubleshoot our websites, these can also be used by auto-scaling rules to scale our app service plan as our workload increases or decreases. There are a number of metrics that are useful to help us identify performance issues. I've highlighted some of the most common below. We've got CPU and memory percentage. Again, this just helps us see how hard our resources or how hard our app service plan is working. We've got data in as well as data out to see how much traffic and bandwidth we have. Disk queue length to help us see if our storage subsystem is causing a bottleneck for us, as well as HTTP queue length to see how much of a backlog for the requests that we have before they're being processed. There are different diagnostic settings that can be configured depending on where you're logging. All the options which we're going to show here below are available for Windows-based web applications. For Linux-based web apps, only the application logging is available. So with that said, one of the first ones is application logging, and these are messages that would be generated by the code you're running within the web app. We've got web server logging, which is the raw HTTP request data in W3C extended format. We've got the detailed error messages, and these are copies of the .html error pages that would typically be sent to the client browser, essentially anytime an HTTP 400 or greater error occurs. We've got failed request tracing. Detailed information about the failed requests. This includes a trace of the IIS components used and the amount of time each one took. And then finally, deployment logging. And these are logs that are generated when we publish content to our web application. In this section, we talked about some of the various configuration options as well as some of the metrics that we can configure in our application and web apps. Now let's jump in the portal and take a closer look. So here we are back in the portal. We've got our Skylines demo web app pulled up, and if we scroll down a little bit, you can see we've got some of the basic metrics listed. So if there's any server errors, so HTTP 500 errors, the amount of data in, data out, response time, number of requests, so on and so forth. So it at least gives us some basic information to where we can see pretty quickly, okay, has the number of responses increased to the point to where average response time is also increasing, so we know we're hitting some sort of bottleneck. Do we have any server errors? Basic data in, data out sort of stuff. If we wanted to take a look now at some of the settings per se of the web app, if we scroll down on the left side and go to configuration, here we can see some of the basic application settings. If we have connection strings, again, that we needed to add so that we were able to communicate or access data that resides somewhere else. We've got general settings here, which again, just the stack that we're using, versions. Always on forces a website to essentially stay warm even if there's no traffic. So if the first person to access the site after a few hours of downtime, it will be the same experience as the 100th person to access that website. If you're looking to utilize application insights for your web app, you need to ensure you have enabled always on. And it is also a requirement for continuous web jobs. Debugging, certificates, some basic certificates, so on and so forth. Default documents, if we needed to change something in this regard, or if we needed to alter the path mapping. So you can see by default, the root virtual path points to the www root path. If we scroll down a little bit under the TLS SSL settings, you can see we've got our minimum TLS version set to 1.2. We do allow HTTP traffic today. We can change that by setting that to on. If we had a custom certificate imported, we would be able to set the binding here. You can see up here is where we would take care of importing those certificates. If we go up a little bit to custom domains, you can see right now we are just using the default one here of Skyline's demo web app.azurewebsites.net. If we wanted to go ahead and add a custom domain, we had the option here, or we could buy one too as well as we like. So with that said, let's take a little bit closer look at some of the metrics. I know we saw some of the preview ones when we were on that home page, but if we scroll down to on the left-hand side down to metrics, under the monitoring category, you can see here we've got a number of different metrics that we can look into. So let's take a look at just CPU time. You can see we had a little bit of a spike there when we first got our website set up, but it's been falling back since then. We can scroll down a little bit to look at the various HTTP response codes and say, for example, we wanted to do HTTP 400x or any 400 errors, we could do that. I had intentionally generated them by trying to basically go to a path that wasn't valid on the website just to show show that on the metrics. Additionally, we can scroll down some more and you can see your memory working set, you can see your response time. So this would be another good metric if you're looking for scaling, auto scaling. If your response time hits a certain threshold, okay, let's look to see if we can't scale out some. If you know based upon your application that is a good metric to look for. You can see we've got a number of different ways on which we can look at the information in our web app to help understand what is going on and the overall health of our web application. If we scroll down a little bit more, you can see we also have our app service logs. And as we discussed during the slides, here's where we can turn on those various options. So if we wanted to enable application logging, which should basically be from the code itself, we can select that and then choose the level that we want to be notified on, or level that we want to log on. If we want to log to be error, warning, information, verbose, etc. We also have the web server logging for W3C logs, error message, failed requests, so on and so forth. If we actually look here, we've got app logging to the file system. We also have application logging to a storage blob as well. So when we do turn this one on, it's going to be logging to the file system of the web server itself. If we turn this one on, it's actually going to be logging to blob storage. And you can see here we can select the same level, but now we can also go through and set what storage blob we're going to be saving it to, as well as the retention. Let's jump back into slides and learn a little bit more about scaling within app services.